You are live.
Okay, Representative Conlon. Oops, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, you'd like me to begin now?
Yes, please.
Sure. Okay, everybody. Hi, I'm Peter Conlon from Cornwall. I'm the chair of the House Education Committee, and I'm here to just give you a brief overview of H454 before the Legislative Council walks you through it, and more to sort of talk high level and a little bit about why we made the decisions that we did. So H454 came to us as essentially the language from the Agency of Education that reflected the governor's education transformation plan. And so we used that as our vehicle, and it's a strike all amendment. But in fact, it really echoes some of the same goals of affordability, of scale, and of opportunity that comes through in the governor's proposal as well. Because we can't hold a future legislature, we can't lock them into doing things. We have a number of intent sections that are there to really sort of map out the steps that are needed, not just this year, but in future years. So section 1 of the plan really talks to that, in 2025, we passed this bill with the added work that you all are doing. And then in 2026 would be the time that the legislature would decide on the newer, larger school districts and their boundaries. Again, it would be the intent of the legislature in 2027 to then take those much larger districts and create voting wards so that we've got fair representation. You can think of a large school district, you could have at-large voting, and that could potentially really concentrate the power of that school board in the population centers. So we really believe that it's going to require voting wards. And a lot of this is sort of GovOps work more than it is House Education. And then with really a goal of November 2028, having the first school boards elected and being operational in 2029. Now, this is different than what the governor has proposed. He thinks we can do it on a much faster timeline with school board elections in 2026. From what we have learned and what we are going to continue to dive into, we're a little concerned that that's really not possible. I mean, when you're creating these new larger districts with new school boards, really new powers, charters for each one, all of the logistics that would go into that alone in having just combining collective bargaining agreements, combining contracts, combining different data management systems, we really don't see that you could really get everything stood up and operating in such a short amount of time. And that also reflects sort of the testimony we received from the Vermont Superintendents Association. Section 2 of the bill really speaks to creating these new larger districts, rather than imagining that the legislature could create these districts in the short time that we have left and be able to do that in a thoughtful way that takes into account all of the sort of details and challenges and uniqueness that Vermont has to offer. We have set that up with a team of retired superintendents, business manager, school board members, who really understand the state, a group of 5 who really understand the state, really understand the quirks and vagaries of all of the various delivery systems we have and the geography that we have, and set them to work to come back to the legislature with no more than 3 alternatives, each with a minimum of about 4,000 students in each district. We know the scant research there is on school district size supports that number as being efficient. There are questions about whether you start losing efficiencies as you get bigger. And we know that significantly smaller, like we have today, could also be viewed as being inefficient. The reason why they are retired people is because we didn't want any sort of view of conflict of interest. After all, if we move to larger districts, many of them will be losing their jobs. So that's why you'll see retired or former in the description of that. It's a 5-person group. We felt that the best place for them was as a non-voting subcommittee of the Commission on the Future of Public Education, which itself is about to embark on a major public engagement program to which we believe this work should be closely tied to. We also kind of slim back the work of the Commission on the Future of Public Education to frankly reflect the fact that there is a proposal on the table that is being strongly advocated for by the governor, and that we are sort of working in a little bit of a new political dynamic as a result of that. So we sort of scaled back a lot of the things that we asked the commission to be doing. All right, so they come back to the legislature in 2026 with the new lines drawn. So let's talk a little bit about scale. Section 3 of the bill is the intent about trying to achieve scale at 3 different levels, being classroom, school, and then, as we just discussed, district level. So beginning in the classroom in Section 4, we talk about class size minimums. We really used numbers that were sort of brought to us in various bits of testimony, and that we felt also reflected that Vermont, for many reasons, is probably not ready for larger sizes, both sort of culturally, how we operate, how we've traditionally operated, but also not sure we even have classrooms that could accommodate classes the size of 25 or larger. So one could look at this as a start. And really the impact of class size minimums can be very significant. Where I live, the town of Ripton, tonight the school board is having a meeting where they may close the school because they are unable to meet their own class size minimums, which are frankly a fair bit smaller than the ones we're proposing. So it's a significant tool, but at the same time, it also I think reflects good teaching. You want a classroom that has more than 3 or 7 kids, that because the kids can learn better from each other and interact better with their learning. There are some exceptions. Think of CTE classes or AP courses at the high school level, things like that. And then we have set up, just sort of some waivers or exceptions that a school could go to the State Board of Education and say, we can't possibly meet these, and we don't really have any other school near us that we could sort of merge with or share grades with, and to allow us to meet those minimums. So it's not a hard and fast. It's it allows for ample opportunity to have the AOE help you achieve those, or go to the State Board of Education to be exempted. We apply this as well to approved independent schools, figuring if we are asking that of the public schools, then those independent schools that rely on public dollars, really kind of, same funding, same rules, but also they have the same waivers and ability to sort of work with the AOE. Charlie, you want me to stop here and take questions or wait till the end? I'm happy to do it right now.
Yeah, it depends on what Rep. Canfield would like to do. I just wanted to interject that as you're going over this bill from the Ways and Means Committee perspective, then we need to be listening for what we think is going to affect the foundation formula that we've prepared, or timelines, all that kind of stuff. So just to make sure we're aware of that as well, not to necessarily argue about the policy, but to get clarifications around how that might affect those things.
Great. Right. And I'll try to keep my explanation here, somewhat limited to those things that I won't go into great detail about areas that you
So
probably don't need to worry about.
if I could interject.
Yep.
Ways and Means, make a notation if you've got a question, and when Peter's done, we'll do that. We'll get a time to ask him, and then we'll do that with each section of the bill as we go through it. Thank you.
School size, when we talk about scale, a little trickier because we have the schools that we have. So this is really where you'll see the injection of a school construction program bill that we've sort of put into this. And it's really the result of about 2 years worth of both legislative time and off-session task force that have been looking at this. There is no funding proposed for it, so it really just sort of creates it. But obviously, school construction and a robust school construction program can't really exist without full funding. But you'll see the details for it there. You just won't see any money attached to it. And the point is really to say, if we're talking about scale, we can't achieve school district or school size scale in many cases without a school being able to either build anew, if you think of like, hey, let's build a regional high school that would replace 3 good size high schools that we have today, or even combining 2 or 3 small elementary schools because they simply may not have the space to make that happen without doing significant renovation. Sorry about the dogs barking in the background. One of the other things that we discussed is if we're achieving scale at many different levels and trying to keep money as best sort of spent within the Vermont, as the secretary likes to say, educational ecosystem, that there are changes that would probably be appropriate for our town tuitioning program. And really much of this is you'll find in the governor's proposal in H4, the original version of H454. So we propose limiting tuition payments. And I guess this is sort of current state and future state, but to a public school located in Vermont or in another state, or to an approved independent school. So we've got recognized schools, approved independent schools, and then approved independent schools eligible to receive public tuition. And that's what I'm talking about here. An approved independent school that is located in Vermont. And this was in the governor's proposal, as of July 1st, 2025, has at least 51% of the total student enrollment on public tuition, which is really to recognize that in many cases, we've had to rely on independent schools to provide the public education. These would be most notably in areas where we have our historic academies and in areas where there is significant geographic isolation. There's a whole swath of the Northeast Kingdom where there are no schools, period, public schools. And so it is to recognize that. And then we also create a new definition for what we refer to as therapeutic schools. These are ones that exclusively really serve kids on IEPs that are not meant to be included with these rules pertaining to approved independent schools eligible to receive public tuition. If we then talk about statewide cohesion, we get to the area that also the state board, or I'm sorry, that the agency has talked about quite a bit, such as having kind of coherent statewide graduation requirements, a statewide school calendar, uniform statewide data systems, both financial and student information. We also asked the AOE to really start coming forward with clear, unambiguous guidance for the field as it begins to work toward larger merged districts. There are so many challenging details in order to make that happen, for them to go into it without some pretty clear pathways and guidance would be very hard. And, we don't really know how much money is going to have to be kind of spread across the system to make that happen. When you think about all of the union contracts with teachers and support staff, bringing those under one collective bargaining agreement, there's the cost to actually make that happen. And then there's the cost of what does that mean for various salary schedules. There's a cost associated with things like if some of the sort of top people will be losing their jobs as a part of merging, many of them are working under multi-year contracts that would probably have to be bought out. So at every level, there are costs that really need to be looked at and thought about in order to make this level of change happen. We also have, really just to close out here, the State Board of Education has asked for funding. It got sort of lost in the shuffle with appropriations. We've included it here. And it's to allow them to kind of clear out a backlog of work and also sort of look at what regulations and rules really need to exist, what rules and regulations they need to be part of, and what rules and regulations could really now be handled by the Agency of Education. And there's an appropriation for that as well. State Board of Education has many responsibilities and very little resources in order to make those happen. That about closes out. I know you're going to go sort of part by part with Ledge Council, but I just wanted to give you all a chance to understand kind of the motivation behind the decisions that we made.
Naslin, is that your hand up? You're muted.
Two questions. At the very beginning, Peter, you said there'll be different districts and each will have their own charters. Are those going to be different? How are those charters going to, without getting too far into the weeds, where are those charters going to come from?
Well, so Legislative Council has really recommended that if we're going to go to much larger, many more towns in them, districts, that probably the best, from a government operations point of view, the best thing to do is to provide each with a charter. Now, we could go with a sort of uniform charter that is the same for each and every one, that mostly talks about roles and responsibilities of school boards and whatnot, as well as names all the towns. Or they may need to be customized based on the different sort of delivery systems that exist in each of those districts. That's as far as I could really take this conversation, because we have not talked about it any further than that. We're going to really try to spend a bunch of our remaining time before the bill comes back to us from the Senate, trying to get a better handle on what that all means and what the work is that's involved.
That's good so far. Then with regards to the 51% from public funding, that makes sense so far as it goes, but it seems to me the 51% could slip to 49% another year, or 47%. What do we do about that? And you don't have to answer now. I'm just posing that as something that
we'll take it as a rhetorical question. You mean that the enrollment could slip?
Yeah. And it wouldn't be 51%. It could be substantially less from one year to another. Does that?
Yes, but the 51% is identifies your baseline eligible schools. That's as of July 1st, 2025. There really isn't reevaluating after that.
Okay, well, I just point out that could slip. Thank you. I don't need a better answer now.
Yep, great, thanks.
Okay, Representative Burkhart.
Thanks very much, Representative Canfield. Representative Conlon, was there any discussion in committee about CBAs as well as bonding and those kinds of things that are going to reach out further into the future, about putting some time limit on how long new contracts can be? I know that when the new healthcare plans were coming into play right around the same time the governor decided to pull healthcare negotiations up to the state level, he told us 2 years in a row that any contract had to end within 1 year, or we had a maximum of a year on anything we were negotiating, just to sort of get ready for that problem that you were mentioning, which is having these multi-year contracts out there. And it sort of seems like if we have several years to roll this plan out. If there were some limits on how long contracts could be, it might help with that problem of having to buy out contracts.
That's an excellent point. Yes. So not only the buyout part, I was referring to sort of non-union contracts with high-level people. And then, union contracts, a lot of districts are, in fact, about to start negotiating new contracts. We did not get into the weeds on that, but probably needs to be thought about. And one would probably benefit from looking about how that was handled during Act 46.
Yeah. And I was wondering the same thing about bonds, just because it sort of feels like there could be a rush if depending on what the discussion is about how to treat existing debt, there could be a rush to kind of build things or take care of things that have been outstanding for a long time, only to determine later on that we don't need a specific building that a lot of money has been put into. And then the other risk, obviously, is that you just sort of defer maintenance for another 5 years on things, which we've done in South Burlington a number of times, thinking that we were going to do something bigger. And so, we have things that are falling apart. So I don't know if there was any discussion about that in committee or not.
Yes, we remain concerned, but didn't really have an easy answer to those districts that are really waiting to do something, but also waiting for the state to come up with a school construction plan, or now waiting to see what their future district might look like. In terms of rushing to spend money, frankly, between the lack of any school construction aid and the fact that it is now counted as part of your excess spending threshold, that has in many cases put a damper on that. Not in all cases.
Representative Brannigan. You're muted, please.
You.
There
There, I
you
think that works. Sorry about that. Thanks, Representative Canfield. Representative Conlon, I thought I heard something about limiting the size of the districts to 4,000 students. Did I hear that? Or
You heard that number, but what we have said is that the district boundary drawing commission or committee would be charged with coming back with districts with a minimum of about 4,000 students.
I see. Can you give me the thinking behind that idea?
Yes, 4,000? In terms of there's not a lot of research as to what is an efficient minimum size of a school district, but what is out there tends to, and it's in the APA work as well, tends to be about 3,900 students.
For the minimum number.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's correct. What about a maximum number? Did you discuss that at all?
We did not. We decided that the commission that we have set up would be best qualified to answer that question.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Sure.
Representative Wazazek. There we go.
Thank you, Rep. Canfield. Just a clarifying question, Peter, or Rep. Conlon, sorry. You mentioned asking AOE to report back with some specific policy recommendations, such as the school-wide calendar. Would that also be due to the legislature for next year for the 26th session?
We have different dates for different, the calendar itself, I think, is later.
Okay.
But some of the report backs and guidance is next year.
So it's not framed as like have all of this work done for next year as these different things are getting worked out.
Yeah, they're especially, they realize that a statewide calendar wouldn't be that easy, considering it has been tried for 40 years and been unsuccessful.
Thank
you. Representative Holcomb.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank your committee for the hard work. So I'm trying to think about this from the perspective of building a foundation plan, and a foundation plan is built making certain assumptions that you're funding what we think has to be in a program. And so I'm curious about when the standards for public schools apply and when they don't apply, because that affects how we fund. And, so for example, looking at the sections around the rules, and particularly with respect to independent schools, did you actually get data on which schools meet that standard, that 51% standard? And when you say July 1, is that students who are enrolled as of July 1 or students who were enrolled as of June 30th in the previous academic year? And do we actually know which schools those are? And I have a bunch of related questions to that.
So we asked for data from AOE. We got it. So we could name schools. I don't have the list in front of me. I will be honest, we are working under the assumption that since the 51% proposal was the governor's originally, that the data that we have is accurate. I can't answer your question off the top of my head as to whether that applies sort of backwards or forwards, June 30th and previous, or July 1st forward.
And then in that vein, I mean, some of those schools are quite small, and I wondered, very, very small. And so I wondered how that, the logic, and I also noticed that the governor proposed to not have private school choice at the elementary level, but the Committee on Education has chosen to provide choice at the elementary level. So that would presumably include some small elementary schools?
Yes. So 51% is not a perfect sort of, I guess, tool to recognize the role that independent schools have played in some areas. But it seemed, as we assumed that the governor was thoughtful about that, as well as we were. The combination of the 51% and class size minimums, we would hope would get to the issue of some that are very small, and sort of an inability to meet that. Again, not a perfect. And yes, we did not go as far as the governor in eliminating it, because while the governor's proposal says 9 through 12, and of course that's all part of his bigger framework, the secretary said to us many times, and of course there are areas where exceptions will need to be made. So when you think about what is now the Kingdom Choice District, where there are no schools at all, there are schools that have been there to fill the need for elementary school attendance there as well. But again, I will be the first to admit this isn't a perfect one. It's almost hard to sort of, without going school by school by school, to get it all straight. The other sort of motivation with the 51% is that when we sort of move to the next step of chartering, it may serve well as sort of a uniform condition versus having to individualize every charter for every sort of exception that lies out there. I'm not sure that I sort of say that speculatively. I'm not sure that it's the perfect way to go about it. But as for right now, it sort of applies to the current state. And maybe when we go to do chartering and all of that for the future state, we can be more precise.
And I think that goes to my question, however, because we're trying to come up with a foundation plan that figures out how much it costs to educate a child. And those assumptions have to be based on shared assumptions around the standards that you're educating to, the requirements and responsibilities that attach to schools that receive that funding. And I'm trying to figure out how to reconcile that with the fact that the only requirement that is going to be uniform is that you meet these class size requirements, but there's no requirements that are common related to school size, related to requiring them to conform to the education quality standards. It's unclear to me that the proficiency-based graduation requirements apply to all contexts that are publicly funded. So I'm trying to figure out how we plan a funding formula that accounts for the fact that many people are going to be educated in schools that don't have the same responsibilities, requirements, and obligations.
Fair enough.
Representative Odie. Carol, you're muted.
Huh, I pressed the button. I don't know why it didn't unmute me. Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to make the point that in the yield bill last year, as long as you bonded by July 2024, those bonds were not counted toward the excess spending threshold. Just want to say, okay, thanks. And I wholeheartedly agree with the questions that Representative Holcomb just asked. It's a conundrum.
Representative Feltus.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, Representative Collin, for all this work. I'm wondering why you determined to use a class size minimum as opposed to a student teacher ratio. Yep. They're slightly different and they both would affect the number, I think they both would affect the number of professionals in the field. Can you give me some more guidance on why you made that decision? Absolutely.
Part of that was guided by testimony from the Vermont Superintendents Association, but also the perhaps imprecise or the inability to sort of figure out what does that mean? Like, what is a teacher? If you have a classroom that has both a general education teacher and a special education teacher in it, does that change the ratio, even though that special educator may be assigned to a handful of students or just one student? So we really felt that class size minimums would be a better way to get to that issue of scale than having to sort of justify or account for what is a teacher in each classroom.
Okay, thanks.
Representative Kimball.
Thank you, Representative Canfield. And Representative Conlon, I'm not sure if this is better for Ledge Council or JFO in terms of, and tell me if which direction you'd like us to go. But in thinking about using a foundation formula, and if a student is attending an independent school, as to what the amount is that student would carry with them to the independent school, did you have conversations about whether that's just the result of the foundation formula as to what that weighted student is worth, or what was your thinking around that?
Our thinking around that was pretty simple, that was an issue that Ways and Means could wrestle with.
Well, thank you so much. That's so kind.
We do not have, the governor's proposal says that the money follows the student. So, under theirs at $13,000, a regular sort of meets all the criteria, doesn't get any of the weights, that 13,000 would be what the independent school receives.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you, Peter. Are you, you're done, right?
I'm done, I guess. I don't see any other questions, and appreciate all your time, and really happy any of you guys can just catch me in the hallway or whatever if you have any further questions. But many of you seem to have a very good understanding of it. And we look forward to your additional work.
Thank you. So committee, we're going to have Beth St. James from Ledge Council walk us through the bill section by section. And under the advice of our chairman, we will try to take a quick break every hour. So, Beth.
Thank you. Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. Can you all hear me okay? Great. I am going to presume that you'd like me to share my screen.
Yes.
And how's that? Okay. So what you have today to walk through is draft 8.1 of a strike all amendment to H 454 as introduced. This is an act relating to transforming Vermont's education governance, quality, and finance systems. This is the draft that was voted out of House Education Friday afternoon. And I have made some change here just for illustrative purposes. I've put effective dates up near the section so that it's easier to track that and we can have conversations about effective dates rather than having to scroll back and forth and see those. So we start with a findings, intent, and plan section. Do you want me to read through these findings or skip to the substantive portions of the bill?
What's your pleasure, committee?
I would say skip findings but go through the legislative intent.
I'm with Teddy.
I agree.
Okay, we're going to go right to the intent section.
Can I
Which
ask
is-
a question about one finding? Chair? It's Rebecca, Chair. I'm trying to figure out if I can ask one question about one finding, number 2.
Sorry, I muted myself.
Oh.
Okay, we're gonna do this, but I want to explain again. We will hold questions until the end of each section that we go through. But if you have this question, go.
I have one question about the findings before we go to the next section. And it just, what is meant, what was the intent behind saying that Vermont founders chose to include a right to public education as opposed to a right to public funded education? Is there a difference in your books or in your understanding?
I can't speak to intent. That would be a question for your colleagues on House Education.
Thank you.
So we're gonna stay in section 1, and we're gonna go to subsection B, which starts on page 3, line 3, intent plan. To ensure that each student is provided substantially equal educational opportunities that will prepare them to thrive in a 21st century world, it is the intent of the General Assembly to work strategically, intentionally, and thoughtfully to ensure that each incremental change made to Vermont's public education system provides strength and support to its only constitutionally required governmental service. And then subdivision 2 lays out kind of, this is the plan portion of this section. So in 2026, it's the intent of the General Assembly to enact new larger school district boundaries and begin the process to create voting wards within each school district to ensure school board membership is apportioned in such a manner as to achieve substantially equal weighting of the votes of all voters in the election of school board members. Provide or enable the provision of the necessary staffing, resources, and support to AOE, the Secretary of State's office, town clerks, and other integral parties to the election system to hold the first school board member elections within the newly created school districts in November 2028. And then on page 4, provide or enable the provision of the necessary staffing, resources, and support to the Agency of Education, State Board of Education, and other integral parties to ensure that the necessary guidance and funding is in place to allow for a smooth and successful transition between the operation of Vermont's current 119 school districts to the new larger school districts, with new school districts assuming responsibility for the education of all resident students on July 1, 2029. And I'm just, until I hear someone tell me otherwise, I'm just going to keep on going, okay?
I don't see any hands up, so keep going.
All right, section 2 would take effect on passage, and this is an amendment to the Commission on the Future of Public Education that was enacted last year in the Yield Bill. So if you were on Ways and Means last year, you should be very familiar with some of this language. And so what this section does, and we'll walk through it, but I'm just going to orient you. What this section does is it creates a subcommittee of non-voting members to do the work of making recommendations to the legislature next year for school district boundaries. And then it changes the duties of the commission as a whole accordingly. So there's no changes made to subsection A, the creation. And there's additions to the membership of the commission. No one is taken off of the commission membership. we've just differentiated between voting and non-voting members. So all of the current members are going to continue to be voting members. And then this amendment adds 5 non-voting members who will form the subcommittee to create the school district boundary recommendations. They would need to be appointed on or before July 15th, 2025, and they all have to have extensive experience working within the Vermont public education system. An appointing authority shall coordinate to ensure that to the extent possible, each of the 5 non-voting members represent a different geographic region of the state. 2 members will be appointed by the Speaker of the House, one of whom shall be a retired or former Vermont superintendent of a supervisory union with multiple member school districts, and one of whom, I'm on page 7 now, shall be either a retired or former Vermont school business manager or a retired or former school board member. The Committee on Committees will also appoint 2 non-voting members, one of whom will be a retired or former Vermont superintendent, one of whom shall be a retired or former Vermont school business manager, and then the governor will appoint one non-voting member who shall be a retired or former Vermont superintendent.
I'm so sorry, Rep. Canfield, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I noticed that those members need to represent different geographic regions of the state. Was the assumption of the committee that the Speaker of the House, the Committee on Committees, and the governor would coordinate to ensure that they're separate appointees? How is that reconciled to ensure geographic representation?
If you look at page 6, line 15, it requires the appointing authorities to coordinate, just like you've mentioned.
Thank you. I missed that. Sorry.
And what you're going to see, what we're going to walk through now is a bunch of changes to the duties and the responsibilities of the commission as a whole to reflect kind of the conversations and work you all are having this year and the charge of the subcommittee. So the steering group of the commission right now is able to create, is actually required to create a subcommittee for finance topics. And you'll see later on that the finance duties have all been struck through. And so we're also removing the requirement that there be a finance subcommittee. The steering group, and we're also removing the language here that the steering group may appoint non-commission members to the Education Finance Subcommittee. What remains is the steering group's ability to form subcommittees. So even though the requirement that there be a finance subcommittee is struck here, the steering group could still choose to create subcommittees. So it could theoretically still choose to create a finance subcommittee, but it would have to be made up of all commission members. Important change here, I am on page 8, line 5. The commission is currently required with consulting with all of these organizations and folks, and we've changed that shall to a may. The duties of the commission on page 9, subsection E, line 6. The duties of the commission, here's where you'll see some of the changes here. So starting on line 10, currently the commission is required to be working on a recommendation for a statewide vision for Vermont's public education system with the recommendations to make that vision a reality. That language is struck, and instead this bill or this amendment proposes that the commission's work from here on out would be to make recommendations for the state level education governance system, including the roles and responsibilities of AOE and the State Board of Education. No changes to the public engagement section. And so here on page 10, line 11, subdivision 2 here, these are the large, if you were on the committee last year or you're familiar with the commission's work, there were 5 buckets of substantive topics that the commission was supposed to do analysis and make recommendations on. And the first one is governance, resources, and administration. This amendment proposes to keep that topic. So the commission would be looking at state level governance, including whether there needed to be changes to AOE or State Board of Education, and what roles and functions should be local control and what roles, functions, or decisions should be state level control, but removed the charge regarding looking at the effective integration of CTE into the statewide vision of the state, because you've removed the statewide vision as the purview of the commission. Subdivision B, physical size and footprint of the education system, is struck entirely. Subdivision C, the role of public schools, is struck entirely. Subdivision D, education finance system, is struck entirely. And we keep on page 15, line 9E, additional considerations. So anything else the commission deems relevant to its work. So the commission as a whole, the voting members, the folks who make up the commission today, would be focused on statewide education governance, the role of AOE, the role of the State Board of Education, local control, state level decisions. The deliverables from the commission as a whole, subdivisions 1 and 2 on page 15, starting on line 14, have already been completed. 3 on line 19 is what's due to you all this year, and it's amended to read that a written report containing its findings and recommendations based on its analysis of the state level governance topics would be due to you all on or before December 1st, 2025. And then the requirement that proposed legislative language for an education funding system is struck, because you've also struck the requirement that they are analyzing and providing recommendations regarding the funding system. No changes to the assistance to the commission as a whole, and no changes to the number of meetings they could have, chair, etc. And then no changes to compensation and reimbursement. On page 17, line 6, we get into the bulk of the changes to this section, and that is the creation of the school district boundary subcommittee to be composed of the 5 non-voting members of the commission, and they are required to determine the most efficient number of school districts and proposed boundary lines based on educational research, Vermont's geographic and cultural landscape, historic attendance patterns, and a comprehensive analysis of school locations, conditions, and capacity. And then the specific duties of this boundary subcommittee are to recommend not more than 3 school district boundary proposals to you all. And those boundary proposals shall increase equitable access to educational opportunity, maximize opportunities for modern regional, middle, and high schools with the least disruption to students, provide access to education for resident students in grades K through 12. I'm on page 18 now. Provide access to CTE for all eligible students. To the extent practical, not separate towns within school districts as those boundaries exist on July 1, 2025. To the extent practical, consider the availability of regional services for students, such as designated agencies, and how those services would integrate into the new proposed school district boundaries. To the extent practical, result in school districts with a minimum average daily membership of approximately 4,000 students. And to the extent practical, consider historic attendance patterns in geographic areas that do not operate public schools at all grade levels from kindergarten through grade 12. Then the subcommittee may make recommendations for the optimal location of schools, including CTE programs, to meet the requirements that we just walked through. The subcommittee is required to provide the updates to the commission regarding its work. And the subcommittee has the sole authority to determine the contents of its report and the maps required later on in the deliverable section. Though the commission may provide its own comments, I'm on page 19 now, to the subcommittee and the relevant committees of jurisdiction, either as an addendum to the report of the subcommittee or as a separate report. So the work of the subcommittee is its own work. It is not going to be voted on or go through the commission in order to make it to you all.
Rep.
I'm on
Canfield, question before.
Teddy, what?
Can I ask a quick question on that last bit?
Well, I was hoping we'd wait till we got to the end of the section.
That's fine.
Make a note and get it. Thank you.
I'm on page 19, line 3, public engagement. The district boundary subcommittee is required to engage and coordinate with the commission's public engagement subcommittee and consultant to maximize public input and feedback regarding the development of the proposed new school districts. The subcommittee is going to have the assistance of the Vermont Center for Geographic Information and may also retain the services of one or more independent third parties to provide facilitation and mediation services to the subcommittee. Subdivision 4 are the deliverables of the subcommittee for you all. So on or before December 1st, the district boundary subcommittee is required to submit to the education committees, the gov ops committees, and then the ways and means and finance committees. 2 things, a report and maps. So the report is to be is to contain the subcommittee's proposed new school district boundaries, including how each of the proposed options meets the requirements of subdivision 1A. And that's all of those like ADM of 4,000, access to CTEs, et cetera. So if they give you 2 options of here's one map with all school district boundaries, here's another map with all school district boundaries, their report has to tell you how each of those options meets all of those requirements, essentially give you their methodology. And then on page 20, they have to actually give you some maps. So they have to submit detailed maps for each proposal. And in addition to the boundaries themselves, the map needs to include average daily membership for each proposed school district for the 23-24 school year, the member towns for each school district, the location of public schools and non-therapeutic approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition as of July 1, 2025, and the grades operated by each of those schools, the 5-year facility condition index score for each school, the PCB testing score for each school, and the 10-year change in enrollment between 2013 and 2023 for each school. And that is it for section 3.
Okay. Teddy, you got a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Beth. Just quickly, the phrase "to the extent practical" is used a lot. Is that left up to the wisdom of the commission on what that actually means?
Yes.
Thank you. That's what I thought.
Charlie, Representative Kimball.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead of Representative Feltus, but just a quick question in terms of the consultants that are mentioned here, Beth, as to are they already properly resourced? Do they have an appropriation already for them, or are we looking for money?
My understanding is that there was, this is a long history, and I will give it to you all once. In 2023, there was created a school construction summer task force with an appropriation of, I believe, $200,000. That task force or working group, I forget the actual nomenclature used, only used about $50,000. And so when the Commission on the Future of Public Education was created last year, there was language in that enabling language, or in the yield bill last year, where the Commission could use that money that was left over from the school construction task force for their work. And so I believe that there is still money left over, somewhere around approximately $25,000, I believe. And so that would technically, since the subcommittee is a part of the commission, that would technically be an allowable use of that money.
Representative Feltus.
Yeah, I note that, thank you. I note that the report and the maps are due on December 1st. The commission ceases to exist on December 31st. I presume that as soon as that report pops out, the relevant committees will want to have a discussion with the commission just to review everything. Was there not a concern that the committees might ask them to go back and do something again? Or is the idea just, we've got 3 plans, and once we understand the 3 plans, we pick one of them, or we modify one of them?
I was not privy to any conversations about asking the subcommittee to redo anything.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Representative Odie?
Thank you. I have two questions. One is, under duties of the district boundaries subcommittee on the bottom of page 17, it says maximize opportunities for modern regional middle and high schools with the least disruption to students. I mean, that's standard. Is that in the eyes of in whose eyes is that?
These are all directions to the subcommittee, and so it would be up for the subcommittee to make recommendations for school district boundaries that maximize opportunities for modern regional middle and high schools to you all, but then you all would be the ones writing the law. So it would be the subcommittee's view on what that means within the context of their recommendations, but then it would be ultimately the legislature's authority or responsibility for if you want to even consider that when you're writing the law next year, and B, if you do want to consider that, what does that mean to the legislature?
Thank you. And the second question is, the very end of the section, it says the location, excuse me, how about population predictions going forward? They're looking at the 10-year change in enrollment between 2013 and 2023 for each school. Did I miss that about predictions going forward?
That's not in here.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a quick one. When you talked about, Beth, when you talked about this steering group with the authority to appoint, at one time you said they could appoint subcommittees regardless if they were voting members or not. Is that?
So the steering commission, if you were to take all of these amendments that you're proposing and they were to be enacted into law, the steering group would still be able to form whatever subcommittees it wanted to make, but they would have to be members of the commission. It doesn't specify that it would be voting or non-voting. And the reason I stressed that point is that current law allows the finance subcommittee to have non-commission members on it. But we're doing away with that option in this amendment.
Okay, thank you. So, committee, should we take 5 or keep on trucking?
5 is fine with me.
I say keep going.
Hmm.
Oh, sorry. 5 is fine.
Whatever you want.
All right, so let's take a short, solid 5 and be back.